And of course, Ona, rest assured, I will acknowledge you profusely. Wow, I thought, what an honor. My dissertation advisor had just told me I might recognize a few of my ideas in a conference paper she was delivering at the Western American Literature Association's annual conference. My ideas. They were original, she said, fit perfectly into her argument about the mythology of the masculine West. She smiled in her charming maternal way. I've been swamped. Time got away from me. But don't worry, I didn't copy you verbatim. I left her office in a cloud. I could envision the audience members mesmerized, hanging on her every word, as they always did. Would she ask me to stand? Point out the specific ideas that influenced her own? Note the cleverness of the title she'd appropriated? Whichever, I was humbled and flattered profusely. That it was Professor X, as I shall call her here, who shared this news with me made it all the more heady. X was a woman on the rise, a brilliant, bold, irreverent instructor on an unobstructed path to tenure. From X, I learned that literary value, like beauty, was relative, was in the eye of the beholder. X taught me that everything, the entire world, is a text, subject to interpretation. She expanded my lexicon, demonstrated how words like problematize and subjectivity could help strip away the veneer of high art. She illustrated how female writers, that damned mob of scribbling women, as Nathaniel Hawthorne called them, had been silenced, how the literary canon was perpetuated by an all-powerful patriarchy. Men, goddamn men, they were the culprits, she said, individualistic, rigid, linear, setting the standards, relying on phallic-centered formulas, determining value by the muscularity of the prose. We sisters, she claimed, were forging an alternate narrative. Herstory was the newly coined term, a resurrection of suppressed voices, writing predicated on connection, community, and mutual respect. And I was all in, embracing the premise that in addition to their overlooked talent, humans with vaginas, with 2 X chromosomes, were more evolved, kind and just. Women put society over self, were bred to look out for each other. In physique, Professor X was large, big-boned, as they say, a comforting presence, a former Mormon who'd left the fold and challenged the status quo. She'd moved from Utah to San Diego and was instantly adored. She had charisma, that intangible quality that can be used but not cultivated. I was enamored with her intelligence, in love with the attention she showered upon me. A few of us, her favorites, lunched with her, were invited to her home. To us, she was a model, a heroine, an Amazon, a warrior with a heart, antithetical to the Jeff Bezoses of the world. The conference was in Vancouver, and I'd brought my teenage daughter, Brooke, along for the trip. I was a returning student, a soon-to-be holder of a PhD in 19th century American literature. It had taken me years, many more than most of my younger colleagues, to reach this goal, and I wanted Brooke to see a little of what I'd worked so hard to achieve. The day of the talk, we arose early and got a good seat, 2 rows back from the dais. I glanced around at the packed room, giddy with anticipation. I tried to catch X's eye, but she was reviewing the paper, the textual melding of professor and student. The crowd quieted, and she began, speaking the title that, but for the elimination of a word, was the one I'd struggled to create. The sign of the cross, church, state, and sex. Mine had a triple before cross. I waited for a glance, a nod, but none came. She was engaged, lost in the event. Or was she? Because for a moment it seemed as she did in fact see me, but pretended she hadn't, her usually bright eyes briefly going dead. My heart skipped a beat as she continued to read, co-opting my approach, analyzing a Western novel through the overlapping triad of church, state, and sex. I recognized my ideas all right, but this wasn't just influence. No, it was more like a takeover, a body snatch. I felt queasy, scribbled a note to Brooke. Holy shit, that's mine. That's really mine. Yes, I scribbled those words, a modern-day member of Hawthorne's damned mob. Brooke picked up on my alarm and scribbled back. What? I tried to calm myself. Wait for the end, I thought. Wait. The profusion would come then. But a creeping cold told me otherwise. Thank you, everyone, X said, clapping, smiling, chair shifting, taking a bow, and departing the room. I was confused and dazed, wondering if I'd inadvertently given her permission. X was a model of integrity. It must have been me, I thought, asking for it. After the panel, I bumped into her in the elevator where she casually noted how wonderful it was that colleagues could borrow from one another without anyone making a fuss. Huh? Did I mishear? Was I losing my mind? Were those eyes even really mine? Again, I doubted myself. Maybe since I'd taken her courses, I was just simply regurgitating her words. My daughter was as troubled as I was by the incident, a double whammy since I'd imagined the experience as uplifting. I spent the remainder of the trip trying to explain to Brooke what I couldn't yet articulate. Eventually, I would come to understand those feelings as betrayal, violation, and abandonment. Feelings which were as much about the model of feminism X had championed as the immediate act of plagiarism. For X, and as I would come to learn many others of her ilk, theory was one thing, practice quite another. A hard lesson that ultimately left me cynical and disillusioned. For weeks afterward, I said nothing, and neither did she. Victim and victimizer. X had taught me about those roles, the male and female version, that is. Victims blaming themselves, victimizers looking outward. And so it went with us. We went about our business, me still questioning my sanity, she holding court, her divinity shining brighter every day. Time passed. I decided to put my head down, earn the degree, and get the hell out. But people like X are never satisfied. They must continue to be fed. I realized the day I happened to notice an announcement in my mailbox that her paper, that paper, our paper, had been published in a prestigious academic journal. And that's when I came back to life, when my blood boiled over. First, I confided in a friend who recommended I talk to my other female committee member, which I did. And I was hopeful until she leaned in and said, "Professor X has had a hard time lately, Ona." Then I knew the fix was in. "Look at all she's done for you." She continued, "You owe her. She thinks of you as a daughter." Gut punch, cognitive dissonance, a blatant display of the kind of manipulation both teachers had associated with patriarchy. Again, I thought maybe I was crazy. But as one by one the ranks closed, as the matriarchs whom I trusted bore their fangs, I began to understand that sisterhood has its limits, that a vagina is secondary to power. Still, I didn't stop. I wrote Professor X, confronted her in a letter. She responded first with an apology and then gifts, postcards, books, and finally with a retraction, stating that the ideas had actually been hers in the first place. I spoke to the men on my committee, who looked at me blankly. I went as high as the department chair, another woman who responded with veiled threats regarding my degree. I could see the writing on the wall, and it was in bright red ink. Time passed, and I passed. My orals, that is. Although Professor X remained on my committee, the literature department agreed to my demand that she be removed as advisor, a small price to pay in exchange for the silence they essentially forced. Toward the end, I learned from a colleague I confided in about another student who had a similar experience with X. We talked, compared notes. The details were confirmatory. But this person had been hurt beyond repair, tragically quitting after completion of her degree. Before completion of her degree. I have no doubt that there were others who suffered X's bite. As any good predator, she handpicked her prey. She targeted the naive and the vulnerable. I was both because I was inherently trusting, a bright and shiny object she nearly, irreparably tarnished. And her superpowers never waned. She borrowed additional works of mine, interestingly involving mythic frontier outlaws Calamity Jane and Deadwood Dick. She surmounted the plagiarism charges, becoming chair of the department herself. This, after I answered a university survey rating my professors, one that assured me of confidentiality and encouraged me to be honest. In my response to my 2-page account, I received this response from the Dean of Graduate Studies. Why didn't you bring this matter to light before? There aren't any ongoing issues. Indeed, she was identified as one of the most effective members of the department. In other words, we don't believe you, and even if we did, we'll make your life miserable if you take this any further. They say revenge is best served cold. I say it's best served in a novel. My novel, The Natural Selection, written and published several years later. A historical mystery about the murder of an exalted college professor and the faculty members who put their fragile egos over the needs of their students. The book was a California Book Award finalist, and I sent a copy to the literature department, making the revenge all the colder. In my story, the she is a he, a brilliant sociopathic XY. But since X also taught me about the fluidity of gender, maybe, just maybe, she'd be proud.